So George, one of the big films that came out this week that you and I were pretty excited to see was The Northman. The Northman?
I'm saying Northman because I'm English.
Yeah, I felt wrong saying man. Latest film directed by Robert Eggers, who you most recently would have known who did The Lighthouse and The Witch, or The Witch, as the poster said. And this is a story that actually I found out when sort of doing a bit of research on this film. It's the Norse folk tale that inspired Hamlet, that inspired The Lion King.
Oh, really?
So, because you know, if I talk about the plot, you'll see very similar
Yes, of course.
plot
That makes total
beats.
sense now.
Makes a lot of sense because that is essentially the story. It's set in, I want to say, 900 AD, Scandinavia, Viking territory. You've got this character played by Alexander Skarsgård, called Amleth, whose father is a king in this micro community. And this is in the trailer, but he is killed and betrayed by his brother named Fjolnir. And as a kid, he basically, which is something you see in the trailer, he says he flees. And it's funny, Robert Eggers actually described a period in the film as the Hakuna Matata scenes.
Oh, really?
Where, he flees and he says, "I will save my mother. I will avenge my father. I will kill you, Fjolnir." And he's like repeating it over and over to himself. And it is sort of Gladiator, Lion King, Hamlet territory. And what happens is he essentially grows up, becomes a mercenary. And while he's a kid, he has this sort of very trippy ceremony with his father and Willem Dafoe, and what I can only describe as like a hippie Nordic bar mitzvah, where like he takes him into this tent. It looks like something that would happen at a Glastonbury. Like they just went, Willem Dafoe, can you be Willem Dafoe and just go absolutely mental in the scene? And he basically is, I want to say, hypnotized into swearing allegiance to his father at all costs, no matter.
This is when he's a child.
This is when he's a child.
And just to interject here, the father's played by Ethan Hawke.
Yes,
his mother's played by Nicole Kidman, and his uncle's played by Klaus Bang, who's a Danish actor, I believe.
Yeah.
Anyone who's seen The Square or Dracula might have been familiar with him.
Yeah.
Anyway, and the child, also looks like, really strangely looks like Mila Jovovich, I thought, of Resident Evil fame.
Sure. Yeah. Anya Taylor-Joy in this as well.
Anya Taylor-Joy as well, and Bjork in a really good scene as well.
Yes.
So over to
and so the film sort of skips forward like 17 years, and you find him as an adult, almost like a mercenary, going through and sort of being very violent. And he sort of has this epiphany where he remembers what he swore and the oath that he made, and he sets out to try and find Fjolnir's new little community in Iceland. And he finds himself actually working as a laborer, as a slave in this community, and from there the film goes on. But I almost feel like talking about this film in a sort of A to B to C plot way does not accurately depict the way that this film is presented, because we talked about films last week that as soon as they start, they grab you and shake you and go, listen, pay attention, because as soon as you start this film, there's this deep like this sort of Nordic speech, and it is very stylized. If you've seen a Robert Eggers film before, you'll know that it deals heavily in mysticism, dream logic, and it's definitely an experience. But that's because I don't want to just talk about the plot. I want to talk about the presentation of this as a whole. But George, you saw it this week. What did you think?
The Northman is brutal, barbaric, bleak, bizarre, but kind of brilliant.
Yeah,
it is kind of brilliant. Robert Eggers has this art historical approach to things. We talk about films being painterly, right? And normally I think of a film like Call Me By Your Name is very painterly, and Little Women is very painterly. But with Robert Eggers, it is like medieval portraiture. It is medieval paintings. The imagery in it is so striking and so informed by art history that it really captures you and is really part of the experience of seeing a Robert Eggers film, and that's why it's great seeing it at the cinema. There were some moments in The Northman of such striking imagery and such shocking violence that I genuinely gasped out loud. And the striking imagery, one in how it's composed, the composition of the imagery is so striking, like the way it's presented, and you think that's just an incredible image. And then there's the striking image in terms of it being striking is psychologically haunting and terrible.
This is why it's reductive to talk about just the plot of this film. You have to mention its style and its cinematic flair.
What he does in this film is create a sense that death is immediate and present at all times.
Yes.
Life is incredibly fragile and incredibly brutal. And there's a moment of violence in it that is only violent by implication. It's actually not violent directly.
I think I know what you mean.
And I was like, everyone in the room, in the auditorium was just like, God, that's just such a dark, horrible thing to happen. But obviously, it's slightly cinematic and cathartic in a weird way as well. Yeah. What I love is that there's all this chaos. I mean, there's some great battle scenes in it, and there's a raid that Alexander Skarsgård's character does very early on. And you've got these charges, you've got spears, you've got arrows, you've got shouting, but the camera is incredibly smooth and steady and glides along. And there's a bit where he climbs up, like a wooden palisade wall, are they called, And it just follows him very gracefully. So you've got this great contrast between the chaos of war and this like steely focus, which I guess is a bit like his character. Yeah. Has this, dead heart, this cold focus. The way that it just creates that world and about how immediate death is and how present it is really unshakable. So even when you're only at like the end of Act 1, as it were, I felt like this film had really got under my skin. I mentioned it a bit with Bjork that's really like haunting, and anyone who's seen The Lighthouse will know how he does those striking images, and they can really kind of burn into your soul. And I really, really admire that. What about you?
That's exactly what I thought in terms of how much I enjoyed the camera work and the cinematography to be in direct contrast with the violence that it portrays on screen. And it's not just in those one-take action scenes. It can be violence that's not literally slashing someone open. It's like those implied violent scenes where there are moments where you're just in a village and the camera is just kind of it kind of actually trucks along between different bits and then comes back. Yeah. And it has this sense where obviously there are cuts in it, but the way that film builds towards its crescendo, regardless of if you enjoyed it, you're going to get to the end of this film and you're just going to be like, wow, what a way to build to the end. And the final shot of the film, you're just like, that's a film that
that's a movie.
Seen. And I think just also, I don't think the film would have been able to sustain itself without amazing performances. Nicole Kidman, like especially, like what a performance.
Oh really? She was the standout for you.
I mean, she's Nicole Kidman was just like pretty disturbing, and I think what we compared it to The Lion King, and I don't think you want to look at that and go, this is very black and white of who's evil and who's good. I think part of what this film reveals to you is that obviously violence is destructive, and there are many different sides to a war and a conflict. And I think you're not necessarily in love with any of the characters, and you're not necessarily rooting for anyone, but the events that happen and the way it builds is just pretty phenomenal, and you are just there going, film done.
As you were saying, the way the Northman weaves like through with the camera, it like weaves like a tapestry of chaos and carnage, like as it goes through the village, just someone getting sliced over there and someone getting their eyes up, something over there, and someone's getting horrible thing happening. It's weaving this like old-fashioned tapestry. I think that the performances are great. I mean, like we've just mentioned, all those cast members, when you see them laid out on a poster, you're like, I would go see any of the people. I'd go see any film from those people. But you mentioned Nicole Kidman, slight divergence. I mean, Alexander Skarsgård, he's a great actor, he's good in everything. He was really good in Big Little Lies. Did you ever watch that?
No.
But he was great in that, and in that, he played the husband to Nicole Kidman, who played his wife. Right. So seeing them on screen as mother and child was slightly disjointed. It
was a different time.
But I agree, and like I said, Klaus Bang is great. It's good to see him in it. And
like Alexander Skarsgård's physicality in this film, it's like hunched like this. He's got his entire neck forward, and he in battle scenes he like marches through like this, it just destroying everything in his wake, and the camera almost like follows him doing that, and it does just feel like that energy is held throughout the whole film until it stops. And Anya Taylor-Joy also
always great,
fantastic in this.
I mean, the big poster that's on the side of a bus right now says "This Generation's Gladiator," which I always think is a little glib. I mean, it's just very attention grabbing.
Great thing to put on a poster.
I'd be lying if that didn't cross my mind. I think there are obviously thematic and structural similarities with that.
The Gladiator is cozier.
Yeah, cozier and a bit safer. Do you know what I was also thinking? It's nobler. It's definitely nobler. Yeah. But even though, this is weird, even though the Northman's set after Gladiator. Isn't that weird?
Yeah.
Whoa, bro. But I also thought of Django Unchained, bizarrely, because of just like this sort of revenge incorporated with like heavy violence.
Yes.
And also, The Revenant, I think, is a quite obvious comparison.
Very obvious
I think I actually preferred it to The Revenant. The Revenant kind of has more... I wasn't going to say has more artistic pretension, because you could definitely say that about The Northman, but there's more like floaty people sort of whispering about, come back to them, in The Revenant, right? Whereas this is much more committed to its own vision of of what it is, and also committed to giving you a good time at the same time. So if I had one downside,
it's entertaining and thrilling, yeah.
If I was to pick out a downside, it would be it's almost so hard, the film, and brutal that it's hard to come away with sort of any resonant feeling of hope or something this really sticks under your skin. Anya Taylor-Joy, I think, plays a really big part in trying to soften and give the audience something else than just a horror show, right?
Yeah.
And there's a really interesting question at the heart of the film, which is like, you have to sometimes make a choice between taking kindness for your kin or pursuing hate for your enemies, and that's one or the other.
Yeah.
But I think in being so hard, I've lost my train of thought.
It's a brutish, aggressive, smacks you in the face experience. It doesn't really glide you through anything. You are very much hit in the face by it. And I think what's nice, what I'm hearing about it, is that it's also being praised for how historically accurate it was. And like these were how Vikings lived in this time, and it's likely how the houses would have looked, how the weapons would have looked, how the jewelries on their arms and necks would have looked. And I think that's quite a nice thing to know. Because I think Vikings are very often inaccurately represented in films.
I think what I meant to say is that it's so hard, but that's okay. But it's because it's so committed and focused. This film never dips. The Northman never dips the whole time. That's what I was really surprised. It really keeps you going.
Yeah.
And sustains itself without. It could easily be silly or high drama. It manages to stay really grounded, and I think it is just through that gritty tactility.
Even though it is gods, will Odin bless this? What is my place in Valhalla?
Yeah.
Mysticism, the kind of like cliched witches in the forest that tell you like a prophecy that will eventually come out. Even though it has all of that, it never felt silly. Yeah,
it's really unflinching.
You got Willem Dafoe in his pants in a tent with a fire, just be like, "What do you want to be?" Remember your father. You're just like, "Okay, Willem Dafoe,
I'll do whatever you say."
Remember who your father was.
So I think if you're a fan of Robert Eggers, you won't be disappointed.
No,
I think if you enjoyed
the
Witch and you enjoyed The Lighthouse, and what I like is that those films are, when you group them together, are definitely of a piece. You can see like his touch on all of those films.
It's definitely
I do still feel like those are all quite different films, actually.
Completely.
The Witch is much more stately paced and much more slow and much more of like a pot boiler, and then The Lighthouse is much more
suffocating. 4x3.
You're talking about The Lighthouse now?
Yeah, The Lighthouse. Yeah. It's like this really closed-in tight experience, black and white.
But also almost like a complete hoot. Some of The Lighthouse I found like blackly funny.
Yes.
It's really almost comedic at times. Like dark, but so bizarre. And yes, it's a sea shanty of a film. And this is, it's a folktale.
I remember watching The Lighthouse on holiday because I thought, holiday, I'll go and watch loads of films. And I watched The Lighthouse like in the early afternoon. And I was in such a weird mood afterwards when I finished it because I had so many weird imageries of like mermaids and lighthouse and just naked men and weird like candlesticks. And I was just like, I need to just sort of do something else before I think about anything that's going on in my life.
I told you recently about a dream I'd had with like hooded figures in it and I couldn't see their faces, right? When I thought about that dream, like last night, I was like, that is what the kind of thing Robert Eggers does in his films.
Yeah.
It's this horrible, nightmarish dream world, and there are loads of dreams.
Blank symmetry staring you in the eyes. Yeah.
I mean, do you remember the bit in The Lighthouse that I really liked was when they started drinking like the lighter fluid for the actual lighthouse light.
Yeah.
And they were like, woo! And I was just like, this film is mad. I'm really enjoying this. And then do you remember that bit where he has the vision where he sees the mermaid in the water?
Yes.
And she like lets out that siren call, and it's like, Great
Watch
stuff.
The Lighthouse.
Yeah, The Lighthouse
will
really
change you.
And you also like watch it with like all the lights off.
Yes.
Turn up to full and just like suck yourself in.
Yeah.
But The Northman, really solid time. I think it's great. I think most people won't be disappointed. It's unflinching. It's brutal. It's full on. It's unapologetic. But I really value that and respect that.
Yeah.